mentioned the CIA triad and how they interconnect in cybersecurity as the goal of cybersecurity. We have least privilege, defense in depth, and AAA. So we're going to be looking at each of these things. Next slide, please. Okay, so this week's focus is the core principles that underpin effective cybersecurity practices. So as I had said in the beginning of this session, these principles are universal and different organizations from small to large enterprises leverage these principles to guide them on their security practices. Next slide, please. All right, so we have the CIA triad, right? The CIA triad. So the CIA triad is a fundamental model in cybersecurity, representing the three essential components that must be protected. Like we had mentioned in our previous class, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now we're going to break this down, right? The first thing we have is confidentiality. Now, this means ensuring that sensitive information is only accessible to those who are authorized to view it, right? We maintain confidentiality through different security measures like encryption, where data is encoded and can only be accessed by someone with the decoding key, or when data is encrypted, right? And can only be accessed with someone that has the decryption key. Access control is also something that plays a significant role when we're talking about confidentiality. So confidentiality in the entirety of it is think of a confidential information like a secret document, right? Only those with the right key or permission should be able to access it. Now, if unauthorized people access it, confidentiality is breached. That is why it is one of the goals of information security. Now we have integrity, right? Integrity involves maintaining the accuracy and completeness of data. We need to ensure that data has not been altered or tampered with in unauthorized ways, right? So imagine sending an email with an attachment. Integrity ensures that that attachment is received without any changes or corruption. Now we can also say, let's say you gave someone 500,000 to keep. Integrity would mean that as you're collecting that 500,000 back, you are collecting exactly 500,000, not 499,000. That is integrity in cybersecurity. So the next we have is availability. Now, this is about ensuring that information and resources are accessible to authorized users when needed. It means having system in place to keep services running smoothly, even in the face of attacks and hardware failures. So we have something called redundancy and failover solutions and regular backup to help maintain availability, like we discussed when we're talking about ransomware in our previous class. Next slide, please. All right, so we have defense in depth and the principle of least privilege. I would want to know if we're following what I've been, teaching so far. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to drop it in the chat. I'm going to look through and attend to your questions. All right, so we have something called defense in depth in cybersecurity, right? It is a strategy that employs multiple layers of defense to protect against cyber threats, right? You can see it like the example we used before of a firewall. You can see it as let's say a castle, right? So even if an attacker breaches the outer walls, they still have to get through several more layers before reaching, whatever is inside the castle that they are coming to look for. We have multiple layers, right? Now, these layers include firewalls, like we discussed previously. We have intrusion detection systems. These are systems that are going to detect when there is an unauthorized access. And then we have antivirus softwares. These are software that, we've heard of antiviruses even from, way before. And then even physical security measures. Now, each layer serves as a checkpoint that makes it more difficult for attackers to succeed. Now, the benefit of defense in depth is that by using this layered approach, we ensure that even if one defensive measure fails, others are in place to provide protection. So this method provides time to detect and respond to attacks before they cause significant harm, right? And then if we're looking for another example to make this clearer, you can also see a company that has a firewall to block unauthorized access. And they don't have only that firewall, they also have an intrusion detection system, an IDS, to monitor for suspicious activity. And they still have encryption in place to protect sensitive data. Now, this way, even if an attacker bypasses the firewall, they still have other security measures to encounter. And then the principle of least privilege. So in our previous class, we talked about zero trust, right? Now let's talk about the principle of least privilege in access control. Now, the principle of least privilege is all about limiting access rights for users to the bare minimum necessary to perform their job functions. Now, why is this important? Because by reducing the number of people who have access to sensitive information or systems, we reduce the potential damage that can be done if those accounts are compromised, right? So, for example, if a user only needs to read data, they shouldn't have the ability to modify or delete it. So, in your Google documents, right, you know that there is the access that allows users to only read and not edit. That gives you an example of what least privilege can be. So imagine a bank where tellers can only access customer information, but they cannot change account details. Only the manager might have privileges to make such changes. Now, this way, even if a teller's account is compromised, the damage is limited. That is the principle of least privilege. Next slide, please. All right, so we have authentication, authorization, and accounting. It's called the AAA framework, right? Now, the AAA framework is a vital model for managing access control and ensuring accountability within an organization, right? Now, let's break this down. First, we have authentication. Now, authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or system. It answers the question, who are you? Common methods are what we have as passwords, your biometric, that's your face scan or your fingerprint. We also have the multi-factor authentication that adds an extra layer of security. So an example of authentication is logging into your email that requires a username and password. Now, if MFA is enabled, that's multi-factor authentication, you might also need to enter the code that has been sent to your phone number. Now, the next we have is authorization, right? So once someone is authenticated, the next step is to determine what they are allowed to do. So authorization answers the question, what are you allowed to do? It's about assigning permissions and ensuring users have access to only the resources that they need. So remember, authentication answers the question, who are you? Authorization answers the question, what are you allowed to do? Now, an example can be an employee that might be authenticated to access the company's network, but they are only authorized to view files in their department's folder, not the entire company's database. That is authorization. Next, we have is accounting. So this involves tracking what users do after they have been authenticated and authorized. Are we following? Hello? Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Can anybody hear me? Hello.
Okay, so someone just said they can hear me. So I think something is wrong with Matthew's internet. Okay, so I think we're just going to continue and hold um on the slides sharing because I had sent it to him to share.
So we're talking about accountability, right? We've discussed authorization and authentication. That authentication answers the question, who are you? While authorization answers the question, what are you allowed to use, right? So let's go to accounting. Accounting involves tracking what the users do after they have been authenticated and authorized. So it answers the question, what did you do? Accounting provides a record of users' activities, which is essential for audit and incident response. Right. So that is what makes up the AAA framework. That is the authentication, authorization, and accounting. First, we have authentication. Authentication answers the question, who are you? Authorization answers the question, what are you allowed to do? And accounting answers the question, what did you do? Now, these things together helps us to um, take note of what is being done by who and if they were actually allowed to perform that action. So, do we understand? Do we have any questions? So, I think I'm going to hold on a bit to see if we have any questions so far on what I just covered. So, you can use the chat to drop your questions if you cannot unmute to talk.
Victoria, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, okay. Sorry about that. I think my
Okay,
network
yeah.
misbehaved.
So I have asked if anybody has any questions to or anything they would want to share on what they've learned from what we've discussed today concerning the core principles, you know, in cybersecurity.
I think we can share our thoughts, like the presenter just said. We can share our thoughts concerning what has been shared. Then probably, if we have any other thing to add up to it, can share our thoughts. Maybe as any other person is coming on, I want to encourage every participant here to lay very serious emphasis on defense in depth. Defense in depth is a very critical approach to cybersecurity. And one of the things I always tell people is when we learn concepts like this and we get exposed to concepts like this, one of the good way to start learning is to start looking for ways we can implement this even in our own daily life. Let me give an example. If all you need to protect your email, everybody has an email. If all you need to protect your email is your password, you are not practicing defense in depth. If all you need to access your WhatsApp is probably the only thing you need is just your PIN, you are not practicing defense in depth. Defense in depth has to do with layer of security measure that you have put in place. So it means you could have your PIN, you could have your password, you could have your biometrics, you could have your MFAs, that is your multi-factor authentication, to be able to ensure that you have layers of security defense to your own critical infrastructure, whatever your critical infrastructure would be. So treating your email as your critical infrastructure, you should ensure that the access to your email is not limited to a password. Now, as cybersecurity students, how do we start implementing this concept into our daily life? You should ensure that at least on a minimum, apart from your password, you initiate or you activate your MFA, your multi-factor authentication for your access to your email. So that at the end of the day, I know most of the time for our personal device, you already have it signed in, your email signed in, so you don't have to keep signing in all the time. So that if you need to access your email on another device, you will activate the two MFAs or the MFA or the multi-factor authentication. You are going to activate it. So that it's not just going to be your password, but your password and maybe a PIN, or your password and a biometric, or your password and an OTP. So that's very, very important. Defense in depth is something you can't underplay when it comes to cybersecurity. And it's actually an aspect of cybersecurity you can start practicing on your own. Remember, we said we don't just want you to come here and just listen to talk. We want you to listen to this talk, listen to this concept, listen to examples, and start practicing, because that's a way to improve your skills. Start practicing, look for ways you can practice. So it's very, very important to ensure you put in defense in depth. And you can see this being displayed even when you talk about physical security infrastructure. You discover that if, for instance, you are in a school, you are in Unilag, for somebody to get to the VC's office, the person will first pass through the security at the gate. That's one layer of security. Then after passing through the security at the gate, the complex or the office that houses the VC's office, you would get to the reception. on the ground floor. Like at least I've visited some universities within and outside the country. You can't just get to the campus and go to the visits office straight. No, you get to the security at the gate. You get to the security at the VC complex where the visits office is. Some people call it Senate building. Some people call it Central Office of Administration. You get there, you pass through the security at the building, then you move to the floor where the visits office is. And even when you get to the floor of the visits office, you are not going straight to the visits office. You still meet some security, 2 or 3 that finds out from you, what do you want? That is actually defense in depth. That is layers of security. Now, the same thing when it comes to our digital assets. We need to practice defense in depth so that at the end of the day, the only defense that your data would have should not just be a password. There should be a password. There should be, like the presenter made us realize, there should be a password. There should be firewalls. There should be encryption, so that at the end of the day, when the bad guys are trying to get into your digital assets, they would have to go through some layers of security to be able to do that. So that is very, very important, and that is very, very critical. I'm going to encourage everybody on this call to take time to go and study defense in depth, because it's a critical aspect of cybersecurity. Go and study defense in depth and go and look at various ways in which you can implement defense in depth. And for your final project, I would make mention of this to you. Part of what you are going to do, you must include the principle of defense in depth. You must deploy the principle of defense in depth into protecting the organization that you'll be assigned to or that you pick up. So please, it's very, very important. If you don't take anything from this training, please pay attention to defense in depth, because it's a critical component of cybersecurity. Then take note, she also told us about the least privilege. Least privilege is also one of the aspects of implementing cybersecurity. Like I always give this example. If you are deploying a kind of infrastructure for an office, and part of that infrastructure is actually a database, there are different people and different offices that will work on that particular database. If a particular office would be working on a database and all that they need to do with that database is to be able to extract information about the date of birth of members of staff for the purpose of sending birthday greetings. Now, the principle of least privilege entails that those particular persons don't have access to other parts of that database. The only part of the database they would have access to is the date of birth. So outside the date of birth, they should not have any other access to that particular database. So it is the principle of least privilege that you are going to deploy to ensure that every other aspect of that database is encrypted to the persons that will be extracting information about date of birth for the purpose of sending birthday messages to members of staff. So once the person is accessing that particular database, the only aspect of the database that is decrypted for them is the date of birth and the name of the staff members. Issues about the account number, issues about maybe even their phone numbers may not be available, issues around probably their what's it called now? Their bank details will not be available. Why? Because the principle of least privilege indicates that you don't need those data to do your work. I have seen offices and I have seen businesses that have had to consult for, and once you are a member of staff, you have access to everybody's database. And I have to make them know that that's a big security risk. You can't, because they're a member of staff, they should not have access to everybody's database. They only have access to the aspect of the database that they need to work. And you can only do that when you already implement the principle of least privilege. So this is also very important to ensure that every organization has a very good security posture. If you don't implement principles of least privilege, it's going to affect the security posture of that particular organization. So that's just a little bit I'll just drop in. I don't know, maybe anybody would want to also share anything further before we call it a day. I don't know if anybody wants to share anything further. I don't know. I hope I am audible. I hope people can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very good, very good, very good. So I don't know, maybe anybody would have anything to say further, or we have any question to ask before we call it a day. Please, like I said, defense in depth is critical to cybersecurity. I have been in several cybersecurity meetings, cybersecurity training, cybersecurity orientation, that all we were discussing about is defense in depth. All we're discussing about is defense in depth. So that as much as possible, we ensure that once there is going to be a glitch, or there's not, let me not call it glitch. Once there's going to be a particular person trying to hack into the system, they don't just have direct access. There are multiple layers of security that they would have to go through. So that's very critical and that's very important. So in the absence of any other thing, I think we might be calling it a day, and we'll be getting ready to have the module 3. Please, let's be reminded, as we mentioned on our group page, that Thursdays now will be for 8 p.m. Thursday will be for 8 p.m. I don't know, probably this timing for Saturday seems not to be maybe convenient for people. We can always evaluate this on the group page too, because somebody was making me to understand that we should also realize the kind of environments we have. We live in a party environment, and most of the time weekends are meant for party. So some persons are already suggesting probably we also consider the time for weekend. Uh, Probably we'll look into that, but let's see how Thursday runs first. Let's not forget, Thursday is now for 8 p.m., not 4 p.m. It's now for 8 p.m., and we encourage every participant to be present. We are 2 modules gone now. We have 2 modules left. And please, I will keep re-emphasizing this. Your learning actually starts immediately we close this class. If I'm to share, when people ask me to share if there's anything called secrets or what has helped me as an individual on this pathway, it is what I'm able to learn after a particular training. So please take note that your own personal training actually starts after this class. Just take every module as we giving you a curriculum.